UFC 283 betting and DraftKings show. We have 15 fights this Saturday. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the bantamweight division, Simon Oliveira comes in as a minus 150 favorite. The comeback on Daniel Marcos is plus 130. And both of these guys are former Dana White Contender Series fighters. Marcos, of course, fought on this last season of Contender Series. Oliveira, the previous season of Contenders. And he's coming off a decision loss to Tony Gravely, in which he was taken down 11 times in that fight. He pulls guillotine a lot. You can take him down easily if you're a decent wrestler, decent grappler, but that's not going to be the game plan of Daniel Marcos. In fact, I'd expect it to be the game plan of Simon Oliveira because he is primarily a grappler. 11 of his 18 wins have come by submission. That guillotine is his best weapon, and we've seen him go to the takedowns in the past. He does have a cardio issue, so you can't really rely on those takedowns. It's not that his wrestling is bad, but it's really not that great either, and if he's going to get tired, I think against a guy like Marcos, who stuffed 11 of 13 attempts in his Contender Series fight, and when he is taken down, he's generally pretty good at working back to his feet. I think that could be a problem with a guy like Oliveira, who does tend to gas out at a pretty decent rate, especially as the fight goes on. So this is one for DraftKings. I think you want to target both sides because Oliveira, if he wins, it could come by a finish if he wraps up another guillotine. It could come by multiple takedowns. And then on the flip side, Marcos, I think he could potentially get a finish here as well because I think he has the better cardio. I think he's the better striker. And I think he could take over, keep the fight standing, and potentially knock out Oliveira as the fight goes on. So give me Marcos by TKO. That's the official pick. Up next in the women's bantamweight division, Josiane Nunes comes in as one of the bigger favorites on the card at minus 500. The comeback on Zara Farron is plus 400. And this is an interesting matchup because these two were originally booked for Josiane Nunes' debut back in 2021. And that fight, Nunes was only a minus 125 favorite. So since then, obviously, she's looked pretty decent in the UFC. The power is certainly there. 7 of her 9 wins have come by knockout. Now she's swelled up to a minus 500 favorite. So I have no interest in backing her at that price or even parlaying her at that price. I'm a little bit more tempted in Farron, and before looking into the fight, I'm like, man, at these odds, you almost have to play Farron and just hope for the best. And then you look at the fight and it's like, well, Farron probably has a pretty good chance to get knocked out here, and it probably comes early. How often do we see a women's fight have an under of 1.5 rounds? Because this one opened up at plus 145, the under 1.5. It's been bet to minus 120 already, and I could see why, because Nunes is just an aggressive power puncher. She's going to look to land that heavy left hand, but Farron is a willing dance partner. You know, in most of her fights, she comes out swinging from the opening bell, and I don't want to underrate her power either. It's just the fact that she's probably the worst grappler on the entire UFC roster across any division. You look at her tape, anytime she's taken down, she has zero semblance of an idea how to get back up, work back to her feet, or to defend herself, whether that's defending submissions, defending strikes. I mean, literally anytime she's taken down, she's literally just lost and eventually finished. And we saw that in her most recent fight against Felicia Spencer as well. I know it's coming off a couple-year layoff, so maybe she's improved that a little bit, but I seriously doubt it. I just think that's who she is as a fighter at this stage. So I think this one could be kind of fun with both women wanting to move forward and trade heavy punches, and I think that's what happens. But I think more than likely it favors the power of Josiane Nunes. So Nunes by knockout is the official pick. Next fight up in the welterweight division, Warlley Alves is now a small favorite at minus 125. The comeback on Nicholas Dalby is plus 105. And I think Alves is the side here. He's coming off a knockout loss to my guy Jeremiah Wells back in 2021. So he's coming off a decent layoff there. He's now been knocked out twice in his career, so the durability is starting to become a concern. But overall, I think he's a very well-rounded fighter, although he's tough to trust. He's basically the fighter who's live as an underdog in almost any matchup, but he's also live to blow it as a big favorite in almost any matchup, if that makes sense. That's sort of just who he is as a fighter. But he averages around 1.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. He's got power on the feet, decent ground game as well. I just think more of the upside lies on the Alves side as opposed to Dalby, who's historically tough to trust. He does not put a stamp on rounds. He's very low volume on the feet. And honestly, I don't think Dalby's durability is that good either. Like, nobody really talks about Dalby's durability because you look on paper and technically he's never been knocked out or finished. You look across the course of his career, this dude's been knocked down 4 or 5 times in the UFC. He had that one overturned fight against Jesse Ronson, which wasn't a great look. And again, he just doesn't put a stamp on rounds. His last 2 decision wins, I thought he lost both of them. And now at even a year older, if anything, he's declining. He looked terrible in his last fight against the corpse of Claudio Silva, who was completely gassed in that fight. So I think more of the upside is on the Alves side. For sure has more finishing ability, and I think is going to be the one having the bigger moments enough to get his hand raised here. So Alves by TKO is the official pick. Next fight up in the lightweight division. This one I'm very excited about. We have Terrence McKinney coming in as a small favorite at -125. The comeback on Ismail Bonfim, the older of 2 Bonfim brothers, the other one being Gabriel Bonfim, who is fighting later on this card, who we'll get to. I think there's a lot of love out there for Ismail Bonfim, and this is a guy who I taped extensively on Dana White's Contender Series. I wanted to fade him in that spot. I think he overperformed relative to expectation. You go back and look at the course of his career across the regional scene, he wasn't facing much competition outside of Moicano back in 2014. He ran through a bunch of bums for the most part, but the defensive grappling, I think, is still a concern. Even though we haven't seen it play out lately, he's been submitted 3 times in the first round, most of those being early on in his career, but a lot of that is because recently guys really haven't taken advantage of those grappling holes outside of 1 or 2 fights. So I think that's a clear advantage for Terrence McKinney here. The flip side, Terrence McKinney, we know what the worry is on McKinney. This dude has 3 to 5 minutes of absolute war in him. But outside of that, he's basically getting himself finished. He's that Derek Minner mentality. Obviously, he's more skilled and more dangerous than Derek Minner, but the story with Minner was always he could either sub you in the first round or dude's going to fall over and die. And that's basically how Terrence McKinney fights in all of his fights. But I really think that you can't overlook the finishing ability and how likely it is that he does secure a finish in the first round here against Bonfim, who I think he's going to have a clear wrestling advantage, a clear grappling advantage. I think he's probably more powerful on the feet as well. McKinney has just under 15 minutes. If you count his Dana White Contender Series fight against Sean Woodson, he has just under 15 minutes of total cage time in the UFC. He's gone 10 of 17 on attempted takedowns in that span. This dude is going to be shooting from the opening bell, and even if he doesn't, he could knock Bonfim down and then take advantage of him on the mat. I think that's going to be a clear edge for McKinney once he gets this fight to the ground. I think the submission is live. I'll be taking some props on McKinney in round 1 or small stabs on McKinney by round 1 submission, depending on what the price is. But I do think that that is the biggest advantage in this fight. On the flip side, the only thing I'll say about Bonfim is the dude has good cardio. So McKinney better get him out of there early, because if not, Bonfim's basically just going to take over. He's got way, way better cardio. He's 6-0 in decisions. He's able to come on late, especially if he feels his opponent's gassing out. We saw that on Contender Series against Abasov. He really dominated as the fight went on. I think that could certainly happen, but he needs to survive that early onslaught from McKinney, and I'm just not convinced that he's going to be able to do so. So give me McKinney by first round submission, and this is a great fight to target on DraftKings this week. Up next, we have Cody Stamann coming in as a sizable favorite at -365. The comeback on Lewin Lacerda is +300, and this one, I think Stamann should have Lacerda covered in pretty much all areas. I expect Stamann to have a clear striking advantage. He obviously comes from a collegiate wrestling background. He's the much more physical, more skilled wrestler in this matchup. The one thing that Lacerda has is dangerous jiu-jitsu. 10 of his 12 wins have come by submission. He's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, and he is very crafty and dangerous when it comes to the grappling. You've seen him pull guard across the regional scene, even in fights that he's losing, and he has been losing fights multiple times, that he ends up securing a finish because that's how good he is on the mat. The problem with that is that might work at the low-level regional scenes. Of course, that's going to work, and that might work even up to like LFA and these other promotions. But once you get to the UFC level, most fighters, especially guys like proven veterans like Cody Stamann, are capable enough in the grappling realm where that's not really going to cut it. And if you don't have anything else to fall back on, I think you're probably going to be in trouble here. So outside of him being able to wrap up some type of fluky submission against Cody Stamann here, I really don't see a path to victory for him. I think Stamann's going to be able to pump that jab repeatedly. He's going to have a clear cardio advantage as well. And we know the fight IQ is there with Cody Stamann. This dude fights a strong game plan, a smart game plan. I don't think he's really going to look to engage in the grappling, even though I think he could stay safe while in top position. I actually think he's going to want to keep this fight on the feet, maintain distance, and win with the striking, because that's the clearest path to victory for him. So give me Stamann by decision. That's the official pick. And when it comes to DraftKings, I just think there's better fighters to target in that range, considering how expensive he is. Up next in the heavyweight division, we have Jailton Almeida coming in as the biggest favorite on the card at minus 900. The comeback on Shamil Abdurakhimov is plus 625. And this isn't a hot take, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because I think we all kind of expect Jailton Almeida to roll in this matchup. You know, he's looked excellent in the UFC through 3 fights. He's had 3 first-round finishes. He's one of the best fighters to come off Dana White's Contender Series over the last couple years, really. And I just think this is a tailor-made matchup for him against Abdurakhimov, who is 42 years old. He's coming off a first-round knockout against Sergey Pavlovich. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, was knocked out all 3 of those times, been knocked out 5 times in his career. I just think at this stage in his career, he's basically got nothing left, and you're going up against a stud prospect who's going to be more powerful, more explosive. I just think he can win this fight wherever it goes. I think he's super explosive on the feet, but also has the dangerous ground game if he decides to go there. I think Almeida, whether he knocks him out or submits him, it's totally up to him, but the finish is coming. Almeida by knockout in the first round, that's the official pick, and he's an obvious strong target on DraftKings as well. Next fight up in the welterweight division, we have the younger brother, Gabriel Bonfim, as a minus 180 favorite against Moner Laziz on the comeback at plus 155. And this was my first bet of the week. I'm on Moner Laziz at plus 160 on the money line for a unit. I'm also going to be looking to add live if he does start slow or even lose the first round, which is within the range of potential outcomes here against a guy like Gabriel Bonfim, who is an aggressive, fast starter. He's a 13-0 undefeated prospect. You know, I like this kid coming into Contender Series. I still think he could have a decent future in the UFC. I just think this is a really tough spot for him in terms of the matchup against a proven guy like Moner Laziz, at least in terms of the striking. You know, I think if Bonfim is going to win this fight, he's going to need to implement the grappling, because yes, he does have a little bit of power on the feet, 3 knockout victories, but it's clear he's more dangerous when it comes to the grappling. 10 of his 13 wins have come by submission. His takedowns are not bad, but in the past, we've seen Laziz get taken down. He's pretty good at working back to his feet. I don't think Bonfim is going to be able to just auto take him down and then insta sub him. I just don't see that happening here. And I think Laziz is going to be having more success in the striking. He's going to be working with a 4-inch reach advantage. He comes from a kickboxing background. And I think defensively speaking, he's much sharper than Bonfim, who's there to be hit. He's there to be countered. So I actually think Laziz should be a favorite in this matchup. I think he has better cardio. He's fought better competition, and I think he's the better overall striker in this matchup. I'm just not convinced that Bonfim is going to be able to come in on his UFC debut and just dominate in terms of the grappling here against a proven guy like Laziz. So give me Laziz by TKO. That's the official pick, and he's a solid underdog target this week on DraftKings. Next fight up, Thiago Moises comes in as a minus 380 favorite. The comeback on UFC debutant Melquizael Costa is plus 310. And this is one where I think if Costa came in with a full camp, I'd maybe have a little bit of interest at this number, but on short notice, replacing Guram Kudalate, who pulled out just a few weeks ago. He just didn't have a lot of time, and he's really just not quite at this level yet. He's a 19-5 prospect fighting out of Brazil, so of course he's a local guy that they needed on short notice, but he's not as bad as you would expect. Like, the striking is good. He's a southpaw striker, does have power, seems to have decent cardio as well. He'll throw some flying knees in there, has good counter striking, and he's not a terrible defensive grappler either. You know, he faced the black belt, I think, in his last fight over in LFA, and he was able to scramble out of some bad positions there. So I think this is one where, again, if he had more time, full camp, maybe it would pique my interest a little bit, but I just think Thiago Moises is going to be too much for him. He's more proven at this level. I think the striking is where Costa could be competitive, but I think Moises is going to be able to lean on him, hold him up against the cage before eventually getting his grappling going. Thiago Moises by submission is the official pick. And oh baby, the next fight up is Gregory Rodriguez, a minus 305 favorite. The comeback on Bruno Ferreira is plus 255. And this is a very fun, exciting matchup. I really favor the Gregory Rodriguez side. I think he's the more skilled fighter fighter, basically wherever the fight goes. He's also going to be much bigger in there, much taller, much stronger, going to have a 3-inch reach advantage as well. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He just has skills wherever the fight goes. And then you have a guy like Bruno Ferreira, who's coming off a win on Dana White's Contender Series, but he's basically just a front-running, explosive power guy who typically goes to his power wrestling, does have a bunch of wins by knockout, early first round knockouts, but most of them have come after he's taken his opponents down and just wailed heavy ground and pound on them. And that could work at the lower levels, but against a guy like Gregory Rodriguez, I'm not even sure that he can take him down as the much smaller fighter. Again, Rodriguez is well versed in the grappling as well. I really don't see that as a path for Ferreira. Now, where Ferreira does add some variance is that he is a very powerful, explosive fighter in his own right, and we have seen Rodriguez hurt and knocked out twice himself. But he has also proven that he can go through the adversity. He fought Chidi Njokuwane in his last fight, had that nasty gash above his eye on his forehead, and was able to persevere, work through that, and take over and dominate, and then get the finish himself. So I just think Rodriguez by TKO is a very likely outcome in this fight. It's a very exciting fight because I think it's going to be all action until bodies hit the floor, but it's going to be one where Rodriguez gets his hand raised. Rodriguez by TKO is the official pick. And up next is a featured bout on the prelims as Ihor Pereira comes in as a -205 favorite. The comeback on Mauricio Shogun Rua is +175. And I gotta say it. Ihor Pereira was, I think, the worst moneyline bet that I think I've ever made in my life. I bet him against Nikolai, my boy, Negumereanu, who absolutely outclassed him in every facet of mixed martial arts, dominated him. Ihor was also gassed within like 3 to 4 minutes, and he wasn't even throwing a ton of volume to begin with. So that's a massive red flag to me. The cardio's a concern. Really, everything's a concern. The fight IQ, the durability, I just don't trust this guy whatsoever. So it's obviously alarming to see him as a -200 favorite in really any matchup. But then you look at the Shogun Rua side, this dude's clearly washed. His best days are behind him at nearly 42 years old. He just really doesn't have it at this stage in his career. Seems to move in slow motion, has been knocked out 6 times at this point, seems to get wobbled or hurt by basically anything that lands. And where I am at least a little bit tempted on the Shogun side is that he's going to be a much better grappler. And if he can get this fight to the mat, this is a guy who averages over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. If he can get the fight there, I think there is a world where he kind of dominates Pereira on the mat, who isn't great defensively on the mat, isn't great really anywhere. But if Pereira is even remotely UFC level, then he should be able to run through Shogun in the striking while it plays out on the feet. So the official pick is going to be Pereira by knockout. But again, I have zero confidence, zero trust in this dude after what we saw in his UFC debut. So I'm just probably going to stay away. But it is definitely leaning more towards a dog or a pass spot in terms of the betting market and in terms of DraftKings, because again, I just do not trust Ihor Pereira whatsoever. He's going to have to prove it. And before we get to the main card, guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button as I continue to bring you more free UFC content each and every week. It takes 2 seconds and it goes a long way helping me out with my channel. I definitely appreciate it. Now back to the fights. And speaking of guys you don't typically trust at a favorite price tag, kicking off the main card is Johnny Walker as a -190 favorite. The comeback on Paul Craig is +160. And this is a really fun matchup as well from an entertainment standpoint. We have 2 aggressive style finishers, but both having red flags as well. Johnny Walker coming off the first round submission win over Ion Cutelaba his last time out. That win snapped the 2-fight losing skid for him. Johnny Walker, we know what he is at this point in his career. He's a very explosive athlete. He's got early round 1 knockout ability, but outside of that, I mentioned the red flags. He's been knocked out 4 times in his career, not to mention some really nasty knockouts. That one against Jamal Hill where he's flailing his arms as he falls back. It just is not good. Like, the dude's chin is not great whatsoever. So, and then on top of that, the defensive grappling concerns as well. He only defends takedowns at 58% in the UFC. You could take him down. You can out-grapple this guy despite him having some jiu-jitsu off his back. I think you can really dominate him if you're a good grappler like that of Paul Craig, who's one of the most dangerous grapplers on the UFC roster. 13 of his 16 wins have come by submission. And you talk about the striking. Yes, it's not great, but we've seen at times when he does sit down on his punches, he has a little bit of power himself. It wouldn't be the craziest thing for him to even hurt Johnny Walker on the feet. And then he can certainly take him down. And if he gets the fight to the ground, I think that's where we're in Paul Craig's world then. And I think that's where he can really control Johnny Walker and even submit Johnny Walker on the mat. So I like Paul Craig as an underdog here. I think there's value on the money line, and I think he's a great underdog pick on DraftKings as well. Next fight up in the women's flyweight division, Jessica Andrade comes in as a minus 460 favorite. The comeback on Lauren Murphy is plus 370. And this is one I don't really have any interest betting. I think on DraftKings, obviously you look at the Andrade side, where her upside is she's an extremely explosive fighter, early round one finishing ability, which seems to be the theme of this card. We have a lot of those fighters that have real round one finishing upside, and she certainly fits that bill as well. Coming off a first round finish win in the main event against Amanda Lemos her last time out, I do think stylistically speaking, she should be able to roll here against Lauren Murphy, who is 40 years old, got a ton of scar tissue, isn't really great in any key area. Her best skill set is just being able to be extremely durable and turn things into like a dog fight. She's a decent boxer, okay ground game. She's just above average in basically every area, but not great in any of them. And I think Andrade's just being the better athlete, being the more explosive striker, much more power on the feet. I think it's more likely that Andrade is able to overwhelm her early in this fight and potentially get her out of there. So Andrade by TKO is going to be the official pick. I think Lauren is live to make it a dogfight. If she can survive that first round, then maybe it gets a little bit of dicey for Andrade. But realistically, I think Andrade probably does enough to get the stoppage here and get her hand raised. And up next, we have Gilbert Burns, a 475 favorite. The comeback on Neil Magny is plus 380. And I think this one, you got to favor Gilbert Burns here. I just think at this stage in his career, he is much better than Neil Magny in almost every area. The one area where I think Magny could have some success, he's always been a decent fighter at range. You know, he has a very educated jab. He's very long and rangy. He's going to be working with a 9-inch reach advantage here. So I don't think it's crazy to think that he could have some striking success here. But Gilbert Burns on the other side has always been good about closing the distance, even fighting up weight classes at times, you know, being the shorter fighter, the stockier fighter with much less reach. He's good at closing the distance, getting inside, making it dirty, and he has explosive power on the feet. But it's the grappling that's his biggest strength. Obviously, he's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 8 submission victories on his record, and I think he could get inside here, make it dirty in the clinch, and eventually take Neil Magny down and dominate him in the grappling. So give me Gilbert Burns by submission. That's the official pick. Which brings us to the co-main event in the flyweight division as Brandon Moreno takes on Deiveson Figueiredo. And this one, we have Moreno as a small favorite, currently at minus 125. The comeback on Figueiredo is plus 105. And we've seen these guys fight 3 different times already. The trilogy bout being back at UFC 270. Now we're seeing this matchup for the 4th time. So we have a lot of data to go off of, which I personally enjoy. And I think there's just quite a bit of stuff to parse through in this matchup. But to summarize all of it is basically, I think Figueiredo has more upside here. I think obviously all of the fights have been close outside of the second fight where Figueiredo notoriously had that tough weight cut, looked out of it, was supposedly sick during the fight week, etc., and Moreno kind of dominated him, eventually submitted him as well. I don't think you could throw that fight out because the tough weight cut thing is kind of always an issue for Figueiredo, but we also have the other 2 fights to go off of as well, where without the point deduction in the first fight, Figueiredo won that decision. Obviously, it was a draw, and then the last fight, Figueiredo edged the decision as well. Brandon Moreno, while his biggest advantage, I think, would be in terms of the grappling, he's always had that dangerous ground game. He's always been an excellent scrambler as well, but Figueiredo is a wonderful scrambler in his own right and has one of the best guillotine chokes in the UFC. So I just think Figueiredo has much more power on the feet, despite both guys being able to tag each other repeatedly in basically all of these fights. I think it's Figueiredo who has the bigger moments with his power, and I think that's really what's swinging me in favor of Figueiredo. I think I picked him every single time they fought, and I'm not going to change it here. I think when the margins are thin, because I do expect this to be a very competitive fight, but I'm almost always going to side with whoever you're getting the plus money with, and now we're getting Figueiredo at plus money, and I just think he's the slightly better fighter. I think he's should have won 2 of the 3 fights, and I think he's going to win this one as well. We're getting slight plus money on it, so give me Davison Figueiredo by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to the main event. Jamal Hill comes in as a minus 140 favorite. The comeback on Glover Teixeira is plus 120, and this is a really fun matchup. I feel like I've said that a lot about this card, but I really think this card, from an entertainment standpoint, is going to deliver across the prelims and the main card, and the main event certainly helps because this is a banger matchup. Jamal Hill's obviously going to be the better striker in this matchup. Explosive power, explosive athlete. 7 of his 11 wins have come by knockout. That's his clear path to victory, is to hurt the old man in Glover Teixeira and knock him out. Glover, on the other hand, 43 years old, but he's proven that even at 43 years old, he's still a tough out for anybody in this division. We've seen time and time again where I personally wanted to count this guy out and be like, oh, he's facing X fighter who's way more powerful. He's going to be able to clip him on the feet and probably get him out of there. We've seen time and time again, he's able to push through that adversity and somehow get the fight to where he needs it, which is on the mat. He's a very aggressive grappler. He's going to have a clear grappling edge over Jamal Hill, who, by the way, was taken down 6 times by Thiago Santos in his last fight, was taken down 6 times back in the day by Darko Stozic as well. Those are not guys that are known for their wrestling, whereas Glover Teixeira is a good wrestler. If he gets Jamal Hill down, I doubt Hill's going to be able to just pop back right to his feet like he was able to in those previous matchups. So if Glover Teixeira is able to survive, if Glover Teixeira is able to survive long enough to get this fight to the ground, then I think he could potentially get a finish over Jamal Hill on the mat, and I think he will. So give me Glover Teixeira by submission. That's the official pick. It's one for DraftKings purposes. Whoever wins this fight is likely going to be optimal. I think it's going to be a finish. I think it likely comes pretty early as well. So again, I think it's one that you're probably going to want to have exposure to both sides, but I'm going with the old man as the underdog in Glover Teixeira this weekend. And be sure to check out fightnumbers.com, where I'll have DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier for the entire slate. I'll have ownership projections, pre-late swap edition, MMA line movement page, fantasy points per minute. It's all completely free. Check it out, fightnumbers.com. And again, appreciate you watching. Best of luck this weekend, and we'll see you next time.